What if everything we knew about the Old Testament came from copies made 1,000 years after the originals were written? For centuries, that was the reality. The oldest complete Hebrew Bible, the very manuscript that serves as the foundation for almost every Old Testament you've ever read, was written by scribes in the Middle Ages around the year 1008 AD. An entire millennium separates that copy from the time of Jesus, and even more time separates it from the era of the prophets. For generations, scholars and skeptics had to wonder what might have been lost or changed in that huge gap of time. Were the stories and laws we know today the same ones read by people in ancient Israel? Or had centuries of copying by hand led to mistakes or even deliberate changes? These were profound questions, and the answers were buried under the dust of history. Then, in 1947, the story goes that a young Bedouin shepherd looking for a lost goat in the Judean desert tossed a stone into a cave and heard pottery shatter. He didn't know it at the time, but he had just stumbled upon the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century, a find that would unlock a 2,000-year-old library and reveal the truth about how faithfully the Bible had been preserved. To really get how important this discovery was, you have to understand the problems scholars faced before 1947. Our main source for the Old Testament was a collection of manuscripts called the Masoretic text. These were painstakingly put together by Jewish scribes known as the Masoretes between the 6th and 10th centuries AD. Their work was an incredible feat of preservation. They even developed a system of vowel and accent marks to make sure the Hebrew text was pronounced correctly, saving it for generations to come. The crown jewel of this tradition is the Leningrad Codex. It's a stunningly beautiful and complete manuscript of the Hebrew Bible, dated to 1008 AD, and it's the source text for countless modern translations. But there's the catch. It's from 1008 AD. The last books of the Old Testament were written around 400 BC, leaving a silent gap of over 1,400 years. Think about it like this. Imagine you had a copy of the US Constitution, but the oldest one you could find was written in the year 3200. Could you be absolutely sure that for over 1,000 years, every copyist had perfectly duplicated the original? That was the dilemma. Scholars had other ancient versions, like the Greek translation known as the Septuagint, but they often differed from the Masoretic text, which just created more questions. Skeptics argued the Bible could have been changed. Maybe prophecies about the Messiah were added later to fit the story of Jesus. Without older manuscripts to compare, it was all a matter of faith. There was no physical proof to bridge that 1,000-year gap. The Leningrad Codex was a lonely island in a vast sea of time, and for all anyone knew, the original shoreline could have looked completely different. The shepherd's discovery kicked off an explosion of exploration. Over the next decade, between 1947 and 1956, Bedouin treasure hunters and archaeologists combed the cliffs near the Dead Sea, uncovering a total of 11 caves filled with ancient scrolls. The site, known as Qumran, gave up a treasure beyond anyone's wildest dreams. It wasn't just a few documents, it was the remains of an entire library. The conditions weren't great. Many scrolls had crumbled into thousands of fragile, faded fragments. Putting them together was like assembling the world's most important jigsaw puzzle, with most of the pieces missing. Yet, through painstaking work, scholars managed to piece together around 900 different manuscripts. These manuscripts fell into three main categories, each a window into the world of Second Temple Judaism. The first, of course, was biblical texts. Over 240 scrolls contained passages from the Hebrew Bible. These were the oldest biblical manuscripts ever found, predating the Leningrad Codex by 1,000 years or more. Suddenly, that gap was closed. The second category was non-canonical religious texts. These were books valued by ancient Jewish communities, but weren't included in the final Protestant or Jewish biblical canon. This vanished library included works like the Book of Jubilees and the fascinating Book of Enoch, filled with apocalyptic visions and stories of fallen angels. These texts had been known, but here they were in their original languages, giving us an unfiltered look at the diverse religious ideas floating around in Jesus' time. The third category was sectarian texts, documents written by the community at Qumran, believed to be a devout Jewish sect called the Essenes. These scrolls laid out their specific rules and beliefs. The community rule detailed their strict lifestyle, while the war scroll described an apocalyptic final battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. One scroll even turned out to be a treasure map. Together, these 900 manuscripts were a library frozen in time, a snapshot of what a deeply religious Jewish community was reading in the century before and during the life of Jesus. Among the hundreds of fragments, one stood apart, a true superstar of the ancient world. Found in that very first cave, the Great Isaiah Scroll remains the most breathtaking of all the finds. What makes it so special? First, its preservation is miraculous. While most biblical texts from the caves were in pieces, this scroll is nearly complete. Stretching an incredible 24 feet long, it contains all 66 chapters of the book of Isaiah. It's the oldest complete copy of any book of the Bible ever found, dating to around 125 BC. This means you're looking at a document that was already ancient when Jesus himself might have read from it in a synagogue. This scroll was the ultimate test case. For the first time, scholars could take a complete book from the Dead Sea Scrolls and place it side by side with the medieval Masoretic text from the Leningrad Codex. This was the moment of truth. Would they be radically different? Would key prophecies be missing? The answer sent a shockwave through the world of biblical scholarship. The two texts were virtually identical. A detailed analysis showed that the Great Isaiah Scroll is word for word identical with the Standard Hebrew Bible in over 95% of the text. The other 5%? Mostly just slips of the pen and minor spelling differences, like the difference between the American color and the British color. The meaning doesn't change. This was the aha moment. The scrolls provided powerful, tangible evidence that Jewish scribes had preserved the scriptures with astounding accuracy for over 1,000 years. The prophecies in Isaiah, including profound passages like Isaiah 53's description of a suffering servant, were not later Christian additions. They were right there in a manuscript that predated Christianity itself. The Old Testament hadn't been passed down like a game of telephone. It had been guarded like a sacred trust. While the Great Isaiah Scroll confirmed the Bible's faithful transmission, the full collection told a more complex story. The Qumran library didn't just have one version of the biblical text, it had several. This revealed that during the Second Temple period, the Hebrew Bible wasn't as uniform as once thought. Instead, multiple textual traditions existed side by side. For centuries, scholars knew of two main Old Testament versions, the Hebrew Masoretic text and the Greek Septuagint. The Septuagint was a translation finished in Egypt around the 2nd century BC and had some big differences from the Masoretic version. For a long time, no one knew if this was because of translation choices or if the translators were working from a different Hebrew source. The Dead Sea Scrolls provided the answer. Among the fragments, scholars found Hebrew manuscripts that actually matched the Greek Septuagint. This was huge. It proved the Septuagint wasn't just a loose translation, it was a careful rendering of a different Hebrew text tradition. For example, the book of Jeremiah is much longer in the Masoretic text than in the Septuagint. The scrolls unearthed Hebrew manuscripts of Jeremiah in both the longer and shorter versions, proving both were circulating at the same time. On top of that, a few manuscripts even reflected a third tradition, the Samaritan Pentateuch. The Samaritans had their own version of the first 5 books of the Bible with some unique edits, like a command to worship on Mount Gerizim instead of in Jerusalem. Finding fragments aligned with this tradition at Qumran showed just how diverse the textual landscape really was. Over time, the tradition that became the Masoretic text grew to be the standard version in Rabbinic Judaism. But the echoes of these other ancient traditions, preserved in the desert caves, give us a clearer, more honest picture of the Bible's rich history. The Dead Sea Scrolls didn't just clarify the Bible we have, they also gave us a glimpse into a world of vanished manuscripts. These were books cherished by the Qumran community that were ultimately left out of the Hebrew Bible's final canon. Finding these texts was like discovering a lost wing of a library. Among the most important was the Book of Enoch. This complex work, referenced in the New Testament book of Jude, was previously only known in its entirety through a later Ethiopic translation. The Qumran caves gave us fragments of the original Aramaic, confirming its age and importance. Similarly, the Book of Jubilees, which retells Genesis and Exodus, was found in so many copies that it may have been considered scripture by the Qumran community. This vanished library shows that the lines of scripture were more fluid back then, but it also led to one of the scroll's most enduring mysteries. As scholars cataloged the biblical fragments, they realized something stunning. They had found pieces of every single Old Testament book except for one. The Book of Esther was completely missing. Why? Scholars have a few theories. One is theological. The Book of Esther is the only book in the Bible that never mentions God's name. Its secular tone might have made it less important to the deeply pious Qumran community. Another theory is practical. The scrolls are an incomplete collection. It's possible fragments of Esther were there but simply disintegrated over time. And finally, there's the simple fact that the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Just because a copy of Esther hasn't been found doesn't definitively prove it was never there. For now, the case of the missing book remains a tantalizing puzzle. For over 70 years, studying the Dead Sea Scrolls relied on two methods: paleography, the study of ancient handwriting, and radiocarbon dating. But in 2025, a groundbreaking new tool emerged, promising to rewrite what we thought we knew. Researchers at the University of Groningen introduced Enoch, an artificial intelligence model designed to date the scrolls with incredible precision. The AI was trained by feeding it high-resolution images of scroll fragments that had already been securely dated using new, more accurate carbon-14 analysis. The model learned to recognize microscopic patterns in handwriting and connect those styles to specific time periods. When tested, Enoch could often pin down a scroll's age to within a narrow window, a level of precision that was previously out of reach. The results are already sending ripples through the scholarly community. The AI analysis suggests that some Dead Sea Scrolls are significantly older than previously estimated. For instance, a manuscript of Daniel, once thought to be written a generation after the events it describes, has now been pushed back to a time contemporary with its presumed author. Perhaps the most radical implication of the AI's findings relates to where the scrolls were written. For decades, the main theory was that the Essenes at Qumran wrote most of the scrolls themselves. However, the new, earlier dates suggest many manuscripts were written before the Qumran settlement was even occupied. This challenges the old narrative, suggesting that Qumran was less of a scroll factory and more of a library or repository for texts brought from Jerusalem and other places. This makes their testimony about the state of the Bible even more powerful, as they represent a collection from mainstream Jewish society, not just an isolated sect. The Enoch AI is like a new time machine, proving that the story of the scrolls is far from over. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls was a profound gift to our understanding of the past. For 1,000 years, the Old Testament stood on a foundation of medieval copies, open to doubt. The scrolls bridged that gap with a library 2,000 years old. They revealed a story of extraordinary preservation. Through the great Isaiah scroll, they showed that the Hebrew Bible we read today is substantially the same text known in the time of Jesus, passed down with remarkable faithfulness. At the same time, they unveiled a more complex and vibrant history. They showed us a time when multiple textual traditions coexisted, giving us a clearer picture of the Bible's development. They opened a window into a vanished library of religious thought. And through new technologies like AI, they continue to challenge old assumptions and reveal new secrets. The scrolls don't weaken the Bible, they ground it in history. They replace the question mark of that 1,000-year gap with the exclamation point of tangible evidence. They are a silent 2,000-year-old witness, testifying to the enduring power of these ancient words and the incredible journey they've taken to reach us today.